All right. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome you all to session 3 of our annual meeting. I'm Vamshi Degala from Keck. Hope everyone is having fun here at our annual meeting. And to continue that, we have 3 great speakers from GDOT to tell us more about some of the projects that our keynote speaker, Mr. Andrew Heath, mentioned this morning. So our first speaker for the 3rd session is Mr. Ben Lempke. And Ben Lempke is the Major Projects Program Manager with GDOT's Office of Traffic Operations. He has a bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Georgia Tech and is a registered professional engineer in Georgia. He began his career with GDOT in 2019 in traffic operations. He has contributed significantly to the SIGOPS and ITS programs throughout his career with GDOT. And in his current role, he is responsible for the procurement and delivery of special projects for the Office of Traffic Operations. Please welcome Ben.
Good afternoon. I'm Ben Lempke, and today I'm presenting on Georgia's broadband program. So I'll run through a background of the program, give a high-level overview, talk into the specifics of the design build side of it and the operate, maintain, commercialize side, and then end with next steps and acknowledgments. So a logical program genesis would be Hurricane Irma back in 2017. At the time, it was the most powerful Atlantic Ocean hurricane in recorded history. And as it neared the continental U.S., there was a lot of uncertainty in the trajectory and at what intensity it would make landfall, and this resulted in a mass evacuation, specifically from Florida. 6.5 million Floridians evacuated, many of them up through and into Georgia. And all of this evacuation in the southeast caused a lot of congestion on the roadways, a lot of jammed up traffic on the interstate systems. And all of this congestion put a massive strain on the cellular network because you have all of these vehicles utilizing their cell phones to get directions, to look for hotels, to call friends and family. And especially in the rural areas where the cellular network's not designed for this kind of density, put a massive strain on it. And as many of you may know, outside of the metro Atlanta area, GDOT's largely reliant on the cellular network to communicate with our ITS devices as well as our signals. So we lost our CCTV coverage of what was going on out there. We couldn't send or update messages to our DMS signs, things like that. So this got us thinking about how we could make a more resilient and dependable ITS network on a statewide level for times of emergency like this, so we can still keep our traffic management capabilities. And so another thing that was going on at the time, or another idea, was the concept of asset recycling. And this is the concept where public agencies will lease their infrastructure to the private sector to derive revenue that will be utilized to build out your transportation infrastructure. So GDOT recognized a commercial opportunity with our fiber infrastructure within the metro Atlanta area. We have roughly 300 centerline miles of fiber in the metro Atlanta area. And so we did market assessments and outreach, and in 2018 went through with an initial procurement for a broadband provider. And this was a design, build, finance, operate, maintain model where the developer would commercialize that existing asset in the metro Atlanta area and utilize the revenue from that to fund the construction and ongoing maintenance for the expanded network. However, GDOT ultimately decided to cancel this procurement, to step back and reassess our approach. We learned a lot of lessons through this industry engagement throughout this initial procurement, and most notably is that the telecom industry is fundamentally different from transportation, both in terms of our procurements, how we communicate them, the timing of them, the language of our agreements, the terms of our agreements. And so we really felt like we needed to step back and reassess, realign with the industry, and restructure our approach. But since then, a few things have happened. Notably, COVID-19 highlighted the importance of high-speed internet, both to GDOT and the public, in terms of remote work and education, telemedicine. A lot of people were stuck indoors, and that's what they relied on to communicate with friends and family. Economic stability, a lot of businesses had to transition to an online model to stay in business. Also, the IIJA, or Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, was passed by Biden in 2021. And this had massive spending to transportation infrastructure and a lot of spending towards broadband, but specifically last mile. So to be clear, the IIJA funding flows through the Department of Commerce to last mile. But we felt like we had a role to play on that middle mile that would support all of this last mile investment. So although no IIJA funding was used for this broadband program, we did feel like we had that role to play in the middle mile space to support this last mile investment. Also, the market has matured. So since then, there have been three notable and relatively relatable procurements. So one is the Pennsylvania Turnpike procured a FOMC in 2021. NCDOT procured their OMC, as well as they have around 600 miles of fiber under construction, under design build. Arizona DOT procured a OMC in late 2022 or early 2023. All of these procurements we learned lessons from, and they all kind of had some similar key items that came out of them. One was constructing with the telecom industry in mind. So we wanted to kind of look outside of our traditional ITS design guidelines into how the telecom industry is installing their infrastructure, how they maintain it, things like that, and really take that into consideration as we design what we want to do. They also utilize innovative construction techniques, so that's another area that the telecom industry is ahead on, is how to install this infrastructure efficiently, as well as maintaining the quality of the infrastructure. This is also a great opportunity for us to look at where we have ITS gaps, since we will be installing the fiber on such a large scale. This is where we can look at, what ITS gaps we have and lump it in, as well as what we can do with this new, more reliable, low latency communication network. And the other thing all of these projects had was a operate, maintain, commercialize, or a OMC model. So now into our current broadband program. So really high level, the objectives and goals of this program is to, one, have a well-maintained, dependable, reliable communication network capable of supporting our ITS and GDOT traffic management capabilities, especially in times of emergency. The other is to leverage our limited access right-of-way throughout the state to provide this middle mile broadband opportunity that will generate economic and social benefits for the region. So you can really think of our program as two separate but related elements. So one is a series of design build projects that's actually installing the infrastructure, and the other is a operate, maintain, commercialize, or OMC P3 agreement that will be essentially leasing this infrastructure to operate, maintain, and commercialize it. As I mentioned, we'll have a series of design build projects used to construct this broadband network. So you can think of what we're installing as this image shown here. We're installing a 7-conduit duct system. 2 of those conduits will be reserved for the GDOT network to support traffic management. One of those conduits will be spare. The other will have a 288 count fiber optic cable in it. The other 5 conduits, those will be reserved for the commercial network, and one of those conduits will also have a 288 count fiber optic cable in it that we're installing during these design build projects, and that's to kind of give the operate, maintain, commercialize contractor the ability to commercialize earlier without having to pull anything themselves. So the second part of this is that operate, maintain, commercialize agreement. So they'll have kind of 2 separate responsibilities, one with regards to the GDOT network and one with regards to the commercial network. The GDOT network, they'll be responsible for the dark fiber maintenance of that GDOT network. And for the commercial network, those other 5 conduits, they'll be responsible for operations, maintenance, and commercialization of it. So now I'm going to start with the design build projects, and then I'll touch on the OMC. These design build projects, they are purely ITS fiber projects. These projects had a logical partnership between Office of Alternative Delivery, who specializes in procuring and delivering these design build projects, and the Office of Traffic Operations, who specializes in our fiber network and our ITS system. So we have 5 projects that are currently programmed. 2 of them have been awarded. One of them has gotten to the construction phase, so they're kind of color-coded with the map here. But just to kind of put this mileage into context, as I mentioned, over the past 25 to 30 years, we've installed roughly 300 centerline miles of fiber optics. And these first 2 projects alone are installing over 500 miles. Design build number 3 is the next one to come that we'll be letting next calendar year. And that's the I-95 corridor that will add approximately 112 miles. But ultimately, the goal is to build out the entire state's limited access right-of-way with this infrastructure. So that's up to 1,400 miles around about. Just to delve into the scope a little more, as I mentioned before, it's that 7 conduit duct system. 2 of those conduits will have a 288 count fiber optic cable in it. We'll be installing mini hubs for the regeneration of the GDOT network. And we'll be installing ITS devices as well, and most notably CV2X RSUs. We'll be installing a comprehensive coverage of them through these first 2 projects. I think we have around 290 RSUs being installed in our interstate system. So these projects are unique in that it's a relatively simple scope, but they're a very large footprint. So we had some unique approaches that I wanted to talk through. So starting with procurement, the traditional design build contract template has a lot of requirements because they're used to dealing with a much more complex scope, interchange projects, things like that. And so we really wanted to make this contract approachable to the ITS industry, specifically a lot of these ITS contractors that haven't served as a prime contractor on GDOT's design build projects before. So we tried to pull back as much of that template contract language that made sense for a scope so simple as this. We also wanted to reduce barriers of entry to those ITS contractors. And so a way that we did that was regarding GDOT contractor pre-qualifications. We kind of rolled that into the procurement process itself. With regards to environmental, we entered into a PCE agreement with Federal Highway to right-size the environmental submittal and action requirements for this project. So one way we did that with regards to archaeology is we defined the shoulder into 4 separate zones. Zone 4 being under the paved shoulder, Zone 3 being under the grassed foreslope, Zone 2 being under the grassed back slope, and Zone 1 being back of right-of-way or at the tree line. And so this we can kind of, now that we have these zones, we were able to determine Zone 1 would have a higher potential archaeology effect. So that's restricted under these projects. Zone 2, not as high, but there's still some potential for archaeological effect. So that has additional surveying requirements if we were to build in that zone. Zones 3 and 4 have a much more unlikely potential to uncover archaeological resources. So those have lesser environmental restrictions. With regards to railroad, these are such long projects. They have a lot of railroad crossings, and where we cross the railroads, cross under them, we're crossing into railroad right-of-way. And so for each of these locations, we have to enter into a license agreement with the railroad to be on that property. So what we did during the procurement phase was we reached out to these railroad operators to pre-negotiate these license agreements. So when the permits are actually submitted, then the license agreements are already negotiated and can be executed quicker. Right-of-way was another piece. Again, these are such large projects, and you would think, all of our interstate system is owned by GDOT, but it's not that simple, because a lot of our interstate system really hasn't had the right-of-way reviewed since the initial construction, especially in the more rural areas. And so this was a good opportunity to do that comprehensive review to identify where we might have any sort of right-of-way concerns that we need to be aware of. With regards to schedule, we wanted to help out these projects as much as possible to have a quick schedule, quick construction schedule. So we did that in a couple ways. One is we allowed for phased NTP3s. NTP3 is basically the notice to proceed, where you're able to start construction. So the design builders are able to segment these projects where they can finish the design for a certain segment, get that approved, and get it under construction while they're still working on design for the rest of the project footprint. Another thing we did was we added conditions for early material acquisition, so the contractor was able to start acquiring some of the long lead item materials quicker than they normally would. With regards to constructability, there are some areas that we are installing this infrastructure where we can't be in the grass slope, where we have to be in the paved shoulder. And where we're in the paved shoulder, there are, of course, traffic control concerns. You want to limit the amount of lane closures you have to have. And with boring itself, it has a lot of limitations in the distance you can bore depending on subsurface materials, the amount of space it requires to bore. So for these projects, we allowed micro duct, where we're using this micro-trenching construction technique. So micro-trenching is a pretty impressive technique if you haven't seen it, but it's in the paved shoulder. They use a saw blade to cut a trench that's about 2 inches wide and 1 to 2 foot deep. They're able to put this 7 conduit duct system, because it's a microduct, into it, and then they cover it back up with a flowable concrete material. So that is a much less restrictive way of installing in the paved shoulder, where you can close off, or you don't have as many traffic control requirements. Let's see. And then design build in itself is inherently, a good way to allow the contractor the flexibility to avoid conflict, so they're able to route the conduit as they see fit to avoid any kind of environmental resources or any constructability conflicts. With regards to maintenance, so the design builder is responsible for maintaining this infrastructure during construction, like any other project. But this is such a long project that is a lot of infrastructure that the design builder has to take on that maintenance risk for. So we built in a term segment maintenance handover where we predefined segments for these projects where the contractor could complete work on that segment, get it accepted, and then turn over the maintenance responsibility to GDOT while they finish up the rest of the project. And then also due to the size of these projects, it's also enforced us to really coordinate well with our other offices and specifically our district. So we have quarterly district coordination meetings with each district for these projects specifically, where we can discuss any sort of construction or maintenance concerns ahead of time and get ahead of it, as well as identify any issues that we need to resolve. Another piece of this is making sure that post-let we have comprehensive as-built data, and so this infrastructure can be incorporated into future GDOT projects, future interstate widenings, things like that. So we have comprehensive as-built data requirements built into these projects with that in mind. Now onto the OMC portion. So this will be a P3 procurement. It will be a 25-year base contract with optional renewal periods, and the procurement for this is structured to get them on board before assets are turned over for these design build projects, and that's to kind of limit any transitional risk there. But the concept is that the OMC contractor will make revenue payments back to GDOT based on the commercial revenue derived from that commercial network of this infrastructure. So as I mentioned before, there's kind of two separate scopes, one with regard to the GDOT network, one with regard to the commercial network. For the GDOT network, they'll be responsible for dark fiber maintenance only. For the commercial network, they'll be responsible for operations, maintenance, and commercialization. They're also required to have non-discriminatory pricing, compliance with FCC requirements. A share of the revenues derived from the commercial activities will flow back to the department. And then they are responsible for abiding by all of the permitting requirements to actually build out the laterals to this infrastructure to actually make it a commercial product. So here's the procurement schedule for that OMC agreement. The selection of the best value proposer is scheduled for later this calendar year, and we're hoping to have them, that contract executed early next calendar year. So now I just want to run through some of these long-term goals for the program. You can kind of think of these as 5-year goals, and I've alluded to them all, but the first is the statewide expansion of our fiber optic network. So really the goal is to build out our fiber optic network to have a more resilient system that's capable of supporting our traffic management and ITS in times of emergency. The other is to build out this expansion of our CVS or our CV capabilities on the interstate system. And so through this fiber infrastructure, we'll have that low latency communication required for a lot of connected vehicle applications, as well as we'll have the RSU coverage comprehensive throughout our interstates. The other is with this expanded network is to have a well-maintained network. So through this OMC agreement, we intend to have a well-maintained, reliable fiber optic network. The next, I didn't mention it, but we're not impacting any of our existing fiber, so especially all of that existing fiber in the Metro Atlanta area. These projects are not impacting that at all, but the goal is to eventually transition onto this new infrastructure as our communication backbone that's more, that will be more readily maintained, and so that will happen through a phased approach in the future. And then the next is to have this revenue that's from the commercialization offset the maintenance costs for this expanded network. So now I just want to end with some acknowledgments. GDOT leadership has been really crucial in pushing this whole program forward, and they've been really supportive where needed. So special shout out to Andrew Heath and John Hibbard on that. With GDOT offices, there's been a lot of engagement specifically from key offices to make this happen. There's a lot of unique aspects to these projects that flow across the department. So it's been great working with everyone throughout the department on this. As far as the procurement teams for these projects, they've been great to work with, so I want to shout them out. Our HNTB, Arcadis, our financial advisor, KPMG, and our legal advisors, Ashurst and McGuire Woods. And then our post-let design build teams have also been great. They've really encompassed this kind of team mentality for these projects, and they've been fantastic to work with. So HNTB is our PMC, Arcadis is our GEC, and WSP is our CEI for these projects. And then the design build teams themselves, BBH Atkins and the Jacobs team, they've been fantastic to work with, and they're really the ones making this happen and making it come to life. So they've been fantastic to work with, and looking forward to these projects progressing. And I think we're saving questions for the end.
Thank you, Ben. That was a great presentation. We'll just hold all questions until the end of all the presentations. And moving on to the next speaker for the session 3, Christina Barry. Christina Barry, PE, has served the Georgia Department of Transportation for 12 years and is currently the Assistant State Traffic Engineer. She manages GDOT's active traffic management components for Georgia's freeways, including TMC operations and the ITS infrastructure. Christina previously served as the District 6 Traffic Engineer in Northwest Georgia. She graduated from Georgia Tech and received bachelor's and master's degrees in civil engineering. Welcome, Christina Barry.
All right. Well, good afternoon for the second time. In this session, I'll be presenting on the Georgia National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Deployment Program. This slide just shows an agenda of the presentation. So we'll go through just a NEVI program overview. We'll talk about Georgia's NEVI plan. We'll look a little bit at the contracting approach. We'll look at the current status of our Round 1 and Round 2 NEVI projects. And then we'll look at some project resources for Round 2. But just to kind of get a read of the room, how many of you have ever driven an electric vehicle? Cool, so quite a few people. How many of you own an electric vehicle? Okay, great. There's a few. I've given this presentation when like 2 people raised their hands, so it's exciting to see that we're getting more interest in electric vehicles. So one thing that NEVI is going to address is range anxiety. So how many of you would consider purchasing an electric vehicle or purchase one sooner if charging stations were more accessible? Cool. All right, so y'all want to pay attention to this presentation then. All right, so the NEVI program was created through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, which is signed into law in November of 2021. The purpose of the program is to create a nationwide network of 500,000 EV chargers by the year 2030. The NEVI program also has several goals. These include the equitable adoption of EVs, the reduction of greenhouse gases, and encouraging U.S. industries to lead global electrification. So the total NEVI program is $5 billion in funding programmed over 5 federal fiscal years, and Georgia's apportionment of that funding is $135 million. To begin using this funding, GDOT, along with all the other state agencies, were required to prepare a plan outlining how we could use the funding to address our charging needs. We'll touch on the plan later in this presentation. So just to start with sort of an overview of charging types, there's 3 main types of charging. The level 1 charger that you see on the top of the slide, that uses AC at 120 volts. And this would be your slowest way to charge your car. It could take 40 or more hours to get a full charge on an electric vehicle. But it can be done at your house using a typical home outlet, and you would get a full charge in multiple days, like I said. Level 2 charging, which is shown in the middle there, that's also AC charging, and it produces 240 volts. And this would be similar to the plug that you would use for your clothes dryer. Level 2 charging can provide a charge and typically charge your car overnight. And so that's something, if you had an electric vehicle, you may plug your car in with a level 2 charger, charge it overnight, and go to work in the morning. But the NEVI program is really focusing on the DC fast chargers, so you see that in the gray box. And the fast chargers, they can charge an electric vehicle in about 20 minutes to 1 hour. There are different types of connectors for these chargers, so the CCS1, the CHAdeMO, and the NACS. For the purposes of NEVI, the CCS1 connectors are required. If the developer wants to provide other types of cables, they can do that, but they're required to provide the CCS1. And that's something that's come up a lot with a lot of the car manufacturers adopting the NACS connectors. So there are quite a few federal standards and requirements for the NEVI program. I just wanted to touch on a few of these here. It's definitely not all-encompassing of all the requirements, but this gives a good overview of some of the major ones. So as I mentioned, we're doing DC fast charging, so each station has to have a minimum of 4 high-powered, which is 150 kilowatt chargers at each NEVI site, and they need to be able to charge 4 vehicles at 150 kilowatts simultaneously. The program is an 80% federal match, and so it'll be 80% federal funds and then 20% provided by the private developer. Now, we do want to make sure that when you stop to charge your vehicle that you're actually able to charge your vehicle. And so for this program, there is a requirement of a 97% charger uptime and 24/7, 365 availability. And so we want to keep that really high so that you can plan your trips and know that you'll be able to charge. Another important thing to note there too is you also, they can't require a subscription plan because we want to make sure that when people stop to charge that they're able to charge. And so you have to have payment methods that anybody can use. As I mentioned, it has to use the non-proprietary CCS Type 1 connectors. There's also quarterly and annual data reporting requirements, which I'll talk about in a minute. There's requirements for operations, maintenance, and contract expiration. So these stations will be in operation for 5 years. And then after 5 years, the developer can either determine that they want to continue the operation of that station or they would need to have a plan to decommission that station. We do have to comply with the American with Disabilities Act, and so you'll see that with the stations that we're building, they will be fully ADA accessible. And then the property interest, the developer has to have, essentially permission to put the charger, whether it's on their own property or they may be working with a property owner to put it there, but they have to have the right to be able to put the charger where they're going to put it. Another federal requirement, so the focus of NEVI to begin with is to build out our alternative fuel corridors. And I'll show you a map a little bit later in the presentation that shows, the entire state and where our alternative fuel corridors are. But for the purposes of right now, it's our interstates and then some major state routes as well. So to build out our AFCs, what does that mean? So it means that we need to have stations that are at least every 50 miles, and then that station to count for NEVI needs to be within a 1 mile radius of the AFC. And so we don't want people that are getting off to charge, you're not gonna have to drive 5 miles to find the charger. It'll be within a 1 mile radius of that AFC. And you can see on the slide that's shown here, we already have some areas that are NEVI compliant, before we started this program, and then we're using NEVI, to fill in those gaps right now. As far as data reporting, so EV Chart was established by the Joint Office to facilitate the standardization and collection of the data submittals. It was launched in February of 2024. And it's a web-based data portal and analytics platform. The manual user interface web application has been released, and the total system-to-system submittal method is under deployment. And access to this system is limited to federal funding recipients and their contractors. Okay, EV chart is broken into 9 modules. These include station location, charging sessions, uptime, outages, maintenance costs, station operator identity, station operator program, distributed energy resources information, and capital and installation costs. Developers are responsible for the data, and they're responsible for submitting the data. So the developers will provide data to GDOT and to EV chart. They have 3 different data submittal timeframes that they have to meet. So they have a one-time data submittal, which is when they commence services. And then there will be a quarterly data submittal, which will be submitted within 10 business days of each calendar quarter, and then an annual data submittal requirement. In addition to that, they also have to make data available to third parties, and so that's an API that must be maintained during the operating period. All right, we're going to shift a little bit and talk about our NEVI deployment plan. So you see our NEVI deployment plan on the screen right here. So it was released in August of 2022, and it was approved by the Joint Office of Energy in September of 2022, and we do have to do yearly updates to this plan. And so the one that you see on the screen was updated for August of 2023, and then we just had an update submitted for 2024. The plan is laid out in sections, which you can see on the slide. These sections include stakeholder engagement, vision and goals, EV charging infrastructure deployment, implementation, civil rights, and equity considerations, cybersecurity, and labor and workforce considerations, just to highlight a few. And the full plan can be found on the GDOT NEVI website. And so if you notice the little QR codes that we have on most of the slides, you can just take a picture of that and find it on our NEVI website. In our plan, we also considered input from a wide variety of stakeholders across the state, just with a better focus to understand equity issues, workforce development, and infrastructure deployment. This slide shows the visions and goals that we have for our NEVI program. First up, since it is a federal program, we want to make sure that we are complying with all federal requirements, which will result in 100% of our interstates and AFCs being fully built out to NEVI program standards. The second one is customer-driven deployment. And so we want to make sure that there's convenient charging and sufficient charging where EV drivers want to charge, regardless of whether private sector investment can fully fund. And you'll see with the map of the AFCs, there are some locations in the state where the private sector has fully funded and they're already, NEVI compliant, but NEVI is going to help fill those gaps in places where maybe the private sector can't fully fund those locations. Economic development, so we want to make sure that we optimize the economic development opportunity from electric vehicles. The next one's a really big one, private sector ownership and operation. GDOT is not in the business of owning charging stations. We do not want to own charging stations, and so these will be privately operated and maintained. And then also, of course, the sustainability and reliability of operations. And as Andrew mentioned in his presentation earlier, we are using the P3 process. So these are design, build, finance, operate, and maintain projects, which is just a way of delivering a project through P3. Georgia DOT already has significant experience using the P3 delivery through other projects. The use of the design, build, finance, operate, maintain extends the private sector's role in financing and maintaining the project, leaving us as the owner. All right, so this slide shows a total map of our AFCs. As you can notice, the kind of green or cyan color, that's where we are fully built out, and then the yellow shows the gaps in the AFC network. Now, if you've seen this presentation before, you may notice that the map looks a little bit different. The green area has been extended, And that is because our round one projects have been awarded to 5 developers. And then a lot of those contracts, I believe we've gotten those contracts executed, and so those projects are underway. And so the green is showing places where we either have charging stations or they're under development. So currently we have 1,978 total miles of alternative fuel corridors. And just a note, in case you're not familiar, so how something becomes an alternative fuel corridor, FHWA has rounds of nominations, and we can essentially nominate corridors to be an AFC. And so over 7 rounds of nominations, this map shows, what we wanted to designate as AFCs. And if you're driving on these routes, you may notice, signs that say alternative fuel corridor. And so if you've seen that, that's just what that means. Currently we have 162 publicly available DC fast chargers in the state. However, if you remember back to the slide that showed all of the federal requirements, not all of those are NEVI compliant. 93 of them are within 1 mile of an AFC exit or intersection, so those meet the distance requirement, but still there may be some reason why they don't meet, maybe they're not 150 kilowatts, maybe there's not 4 of them, there's a lot of different reasons why, they may not be counted even though they may be out there and you guys may be using them. So we had 14 NEVI compliant charging stations before we started this project. We've added 5 more, and so we are well on our way. And then our round 2 project is going to add 33 more. I would also note that we also have 42 Tesla-only supercharger sites, but again, if it doesn't have CCS connectors, then it's not NEVI compliant. So this shows our round 1 locations. They're circled in pink if you can see it. But the round 1 locations represent a radius around the interchange where a charging station could be located to build out the gap. And I'll show you, we've already awarded these, so I'll show you the exact locations in a minute. Let's see. All right, so this is our round 1. This is who we awarded the sites to. We had a site in Tifton that was awarded to EnviroSpark Networks. Fort Valley was awarded to Francis Energy Charging. The site in Dublin was awarded to Silver Comet Energy. The site in Metter was awarded to EnviroSpark, and the site in Brunswick was awarded to Love's Travel Stops and Country Stores. And this just shows an overview of the site plan that was submitted with the proposal. This one is for Tifton. And when we looked at the proposals, there are different things that we look at and evaluated proposals. One of those was amenities. And so this particular one doesn't have a canopy proposed, but it is in a Waffle House parking lot, so you do have some amenities with that. And then if you notice, it has some sidewalks, and so there's potentially some things that you could walk to. Let's see. This is the Francis Energy Charging Project in Fort Valley. This is going to be at a Wendy's. They're also not proposing a canopy here, but they did note that they left the potential for a solar canopy to be added in the future. This is a racetrack in Dublin, Georgia. So this one was awarded to Silver Comet Energy. And this project site will include a canopy for charging stations. And you may have seen these. I know that Racetrack has built a few already. There's one in Oxford, Alabama, that shows kind of what there's up in the corner. It shows what the charging station will actually look like with the canopy. Unfortunately, it's upside down on their thing, but that's what it'll look like. This is the one in Metter, Georgia. So that'll be at the Shell Superstop gas station. They're also not proposing a canopy. And then this is Love's Travel Stop and Country Stores, which will include a solar canopy over the EV charging area. And additionally, I would also just mention that a couple of the proposers did opt to include some NACS connectors on their charging stations, but not all of them. This map shows our round 2 locations, and so we have 33 locations in round 2, and once we fill all these 33 locations, then we will have built out the AFCs in Georgia. Round 2 is currently in procurement, using BitExpress. If you're interested, you can use the QR codes to look at our NEVI website or our industry forum to get more information. If you're interested in seeing more about these locations, we also have a mapping tool for round 2. And you can use the QR code on the slide to go to the mapping tool. So this is essentially just going to show you the polygons of, showing the area where the charging station locations are. And if you kind of zoom in, you'll see kind of a big, sort of round bulbous polygon. And then if you zoom in even closer, you'll see an actual, shape that shows where the charging station could be. And I would mention, so this one, you can see location 7, you can see that big polygon. When you zoom in, you see several different areas, and that just means that there's several different areas where the charging station can go. But there's only going to be one charging station for location 7, whether it's in, the middle polygon or the top one or whatever. So each location only gets one charging station, even if it has multiple areas where it could be placed to be NEVI compliant. This shows our procurement schedule for round 2. So far, we've made quite a bit of progress. We've issued the RFP. We have held the one-on-one meetings, and we are looking forward to the proposal due date on September 30th. We do anticipate the selection of the apparent best value proposer in February of next year, and then we anticipate executing the agreements in June. This chart shows the project management team for the project, led by GDOT as the owner and key decision maker. GDOT is responsible for managing the procurement process, project oversight, contracting, and payments. But I do want to recognize the team that supports us by various legal, technical, and financial advisors. These include H&TB, EY, JLL, Ashurst, McGuire Woods, and Ames & Gow. And I believe that we are waiting for questions till the end, so thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Those are some great insights into EV charging. All right, so we are moving on to a third speaker of the session 3, David Miranda with GDOT. David Miranda is the Assistant State ITS Supervisor for Georgia Department of Transportation with 7 years of experience working within ITS and traffic operations. He oversees aspects of both ITS maintenance and design. This includes GDOT ITS Comprehensive Maintenance Contract, Lump Sum Program, ITS Design On-Call Contracts, and GDOT's fiber network. His efforts have involved modernizing existing devices and processes, the build-out and implementation of GDOT's fiber asset management system, and building a more robust ITS network to better prepare GDOT for future endeavors. He enjoys the constantly evolving nature of ITS, which lends itself to finding newer and better solutions to problems. David has a bachelor's in civil engineering from Georgia Tech and is a registered PE with the state of Georgia. Welcome, David.
Right. Thank you very much, Vamshi. As he said, I am David Miranda, and I'm presenting to you with the last of the GDOT presentations here on the most riveting of the 3 topics, right? The ITS design guidelines and specifications. So I know this is not the most interesting subject, but it's a very important subject. It affects everybody in this room, vendors, consultants, GDOT itself. And I'll try not to bore everybody too much and get you over to the festivities as quick as I can. So we'll start off with the agenda real quick. We're going to do a quick project background and goals, essentially, for this project. And then we're going to talk about the timeline and approach that we used with updating these specifications. And then we're going to close out with some high-level updates that are happening with specifics to the guidelines and specifications, and then also the addition of 2 new specs that we are currently working on. Okay, so for some project background here, the 2 documents in question, first we have the ITS design guidelines, right, which are basically handrails for designers on how to design ITS in the state of Georgia and everything that encapsulates. And we also have the specifications, which basically are the means, materials, and methods for how ITS is installed in the field, and requirements for how that's done. As a show of hands, how many folks in this room have familiarity with the guidelines and have found inconsistencies or areas that could be improved? All right. That's exactly what we were expecting to see. That's just the nature of the beast with the ITS guidelines and specifications. We try our best basically to keep everything up to date, but as everybody in this room knows, the field's constantly evolving and changing, and we just can never 100% be up to date. Our efforts in regards to the guidelines and specifications started in earnest with the previous ITS guidelines being revised in November 2020 and the spec book being done in 2021. We're trying to target a 2-year cycle for everything going forward, just to kind of keep things up to date and keep it refreshed and applicable for everybody that uses these 2 important documents. All right. And to get into some of the goals, like I said here, just to kind of reiterate, number 1 was to refine and enhance the current ITS design guidelines. That's just to keep things up to date, keep things current, and also include as many of the new evolving technologies that we are currently looking at. That ties into point 3. Just to hit 2 real quick: compliance with national practices and standards. A good example of this would be the MUTCD version 11 being adopted by GDOT recently. So making sure we're compliant with that as far as the guidance that we're giving out. And then for number 3, implementation of innovative technology is probably the most fun stuff, where we start talking about things that currently aren't spec'd out, emerging technologies that GDOT is pretty much testing or in the process of getting tested, things such as wrong way driving and truck parking, things of that nature. But making sure that we have some guidance or at least some verbiage acknowledging that to be a point. So for our team here, I'm the PM for this from the GDOT side of things within ITS, and Alex Estrada and Ben Lempke, both here, have been helping out from an SME role. For a consultant, we have HNDB helping us out with John Edge acting as the project manager. Consultant SMEs are Charlie Farnham and Deborah Vermillion. And then also a shout out to the DB support in Maldonado Burkett from Scott and Jeremy Love, who've assisted with this as well. And so to give a quick timeline here of what we are trying to do, one of our primary goals in doing this process was to collect feedback from our stakeholders and gather information prior to the design guidelines being done. GDOT also collected this information from internal offices as well, and also identified the ITS design guidelines that were being targeted as areas of improvement, essentially. So this started off in earnest in June, August of 2023, where we compiled all these documents together, and continued on to September, October 2023, where we reached out to the industry in earnest. We went into ITE and ITS Georgia as a starting place to go get comments from the industry and stakeholders, and this continued for about a month. Throughout this process, we were pretty much updating all the documents, creating new documents as well. And in February 2024, we pretty much had most of the stuff finalized. The EAG and hub industry outreach happened then when we had our draft documents finished. And in April 2024, we finalized the drafts. Currently, we are in publishing, and I will touch on that next slide. So for our approach, industry stakeholder outreach was pretty much, like I said earlier, receiving the comments and input from various stakeholders and SMEs with the stake in ITS. We did a comment review, response, and drafting where we revised documents based on all this input, edited things, added, subtracted things as needed, and then we did an internal stakeholder review of everything as well with the page turn. Currently, we are, like I said, we are in finalization and publishing of the documents. And currently, we are working with the office heads that own all the documents to get their blessing to basically move on to the next portion with engineering services, where we'll go through 2 rounds of review, and then we can finally assign some pay items and things like that, numbers that we need basically to finalize before we can publish these documents. Right, and so, all right, there we go. Are you ready for the biggest change from these documents, all right? Yeah. All right, we have a new cover. That's the biggest thing right there, guys. That's everything that's being changed. So the previous document didn't have the nice fancy GDOT logo and branding. So that's the biggest thing. But in all seriousness, what is it? ITS design guidelines. This is a pretty high level. Summation of everything that's been done. So on the first point, placement of ITS assets, that's always changing constantly. There's some increased information about that, specifically relating to hubs, DMSs, CCTVs, AID, and things of that nature. Verbiage and formatting gets changed every time we do one of these, so that's also been a thing that's changed quite a lot. There were some old DSRC references that are no longer applicable in the ITS design manual from 2020, so did that. And then we also have enhanced guidelines for emergency access gates, or EAGs, and network communication buildings, or hubs. This kind of ties in with our specifications that we had created specifically for those two devices, or ITS assets. Another thing we did here was the emerging technologies, and this was a short section that we did specifically to address, like I said, some of those new technologies that we're testing or have pilots for. Wrong-way driving, truck parking will be coming into that in test sphere as well. And then we also have the standard naming guidelines, which in the previous iteration were addressed directly. In this iteration, all that stuff has been taken out. We are including links essentially to those two documents. There's two different documents there, one for ITS asset standard naming guidelines, which are basically all ITS assets that are going to be within the ITS asset management system, or IMS, so a lot of acronyms here. But that documentation has pretty much been completely overhauled since the previous iteration, and is completely new. I believe we are in the steps of finalizing that, if I'm not mistaken, and getting that published. Site and fiber asset or fiber standard naming guidelines have also been included in this one, and this is kind of a new document that we've devised in preparation for some of the broadband elements and things of that nature that are currently ongoing. And like I said, both of those will be referenced. They will not live inside this document, but they will be their own document. And so to touch on a few of the other guidelines, we have the emergency access gate guidelines. This is just very high level here to touch on a few of the big points. Placement. So in the past, we've had some EAG show up on projects where we probably didn't need them. And so this is just to give further guidance to designers and consultants doing these projects that these are to be rarely installed, and the designer should coordinate with GDOT in order to determine locations. This is also kind of done in preparation of all the MMIP projects that are being done on the interstates, essentially, and to include guidance that's easily accessible for those projects kind of referenced, and EAGs will be included most likely on those new express lane projects. The other things too included are references to the EAG specs as well, so just nice and succinct there. And then for the hub buildings, we have new guidance on that as well. New hub types have been defined within the specifications with a preference for type 1 or 2. Safety and access were also addressed as well with some hubs being installed recently in less than ideal circumstances. We're just giving as much guidance to folks on how we need things set up and exactly the requirements there. So accessibility at the ramps and ideal locations and configurations, essentially. And so here's a Venn diagram of basically all the specifications that are being affected by this effort. We have one for construction for portable, changeable message signs that they own, essentially. We do have a stake in that. And then we have our shared specs, which are DMS, traffic control signal installation, and then electrical wire cable, which is owned by design policy with a bunch of stakeholders, including ourselves. Office Traffic Operations owns the rest of them, and those range from CCTV to environmental sensor stations and other items like that. The next few slides, we're going to highlight a few changes throughout the specs. These are not all encompassing, but you are encouraged to review the specs when they are published and familiarize yourself with any revisions. Also of note that these specs will be published as a supplemental specification in the future. So the key revisions here for section 942, ITS design requirements or general requirements. Definitions, acronyms, and abbreviations have been standardized throughout all specifications with references to 942 specifically. A big one here would be locates. So Georgia, or Office of Traffic Operations recently hopped onto Georgia 811, and locating is being done through them currently. As such, we've had to kind of develop languages for some of the major projects in order to kind of keep things under control. And so the language that was included within the specifications to kind of codify all this was adapted from the TP17s or technical provisions for a lot of the MMIP projects and DB projects that are being done currently. We incorporated that basically to help contractors understand our expectations for locating ITS equipment, especially fiber in that case. Testing and acceptance procedures, this relates to what we are doing currently with regards to some Nexus work stuff. This is for geolocating new fiber assets, and we're currently working to try to determine where this should actually kind of live as far as specifications are concerned. Section 694, just some quick updates here. Remote processing unit is now a data management unit. And then there's also some changes to the sensor performances for in-ground pavement condition sensors to align with some other DOTs more closely. To continue it, we have fiber optic system, section 935. There's some slight changes to snowshoes. Fiber optic locates, right, like I said, is included in this spec as well. And then there's also accompanying pay items to help that out in the form of testing, and then also a fiber optic cable locator for that one. Closed circuit television, 936. Legacy equipment has been removed on that one. And so we're looking basically at removing analog CCTVs from that specification. I mean, nobody installs them anyway at this point, so just to make sure that folks don't install them, we're pretty much getting rid of all the guidance and everything for that. Paid items may remain in place with the expectation that they will be completely gone in the next update. For 937 detection devices, pretty much just a few changes as far as terminology is concerned, such as microwave vehicle detection system to radar detection system. So I won't waste too much time on that. Section 939, communication electronic equipment. There's been a few changes with additional language added for type D and E switches, mostly for layer capability and Ethernet port configurations. Also updated requirements for installation. And then also some revised pay items, mostly in the form of removing multi-mid fiber, in addition to trying to get rid of some of that legacy stuff that we don't use. As far as updates to come, we have three major things. We have the alignment with broadband specifications. We've been working with Ben on that side to kind of get any of the updates that we need from his side of things, basically, into these specifications. We're also working with SIGOPS to kind of get some of their preliminary comments. They are expected to be doing a specification update as well on their side afterwards, but we're trying to get into the early stuff essentially and get going from that side. And then also we are aligning with the MUTCD version 11 as stated earlier. And so those are the three major things that we're kind of covering. As far as other new specifications, we're talking about emergency access gate. I won't kind of go through all of this, but you know, essentially material components, measurement and payment. We would encourage everybody to take a look at the new EAGs, especially if you're a vendor, just to kind of get your a feel for this once this is published, like I said. Overall, you know, just gets into the weeds a bit, but you know, for the sake of brevity, we'll move on. And then the other new specification is the communication network building or hub. Like I said, this is similar to the other one, EAG. We've had hub buildings for a while. The big thing to take away here is the updated pay items, I would say. New hub building types, mini hubs, and some other things have been added. There's also been some added guidance as far as HVAC, electrical power, grounding, and things like that, as well as environmental controls for the reliability and safety in the area. Okay. And to finish up here, current project status, like I said, we kind of touched on these three already, but additional spec revisions. GDOT SIGOPS team is currently in the process of reviewing and updating some shared specs right now. We expect to have those comments soon and kind of move ahead from that perspective. MUTCD version 11 is getting updated again, like I said, or it's not getting updated, but we're aligning our documents with that document. And then the publishing of the design guidelines and specs, we are expecting this to be done in Q4 2024. That's what we're kind of shooting for. It may go further, but as of right now, there's not a definitive date that we have identified, but we are shooting to try to get it done before 2024. And then from there, I just want to go and point your attention to this QR code here. This is a link to the source where you can find basically all of the information that we have here as far as specifications and ITS design manuals. We encourage everybody to visit GDOT's website for the current and up-to-date specifications, design guidelines, and manuals, pay items. So without further ado, we'll skip the questions. And I would like to thank you guys for the opportunity. And if you have any questions, have any comments with regards to guidelines or anything like that in the future, feel free to reach out to GDOT ITS. We'll take all those comments into consideration for the next round. And I have my contact information right there. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, David. So the floor is open for questions from the audience. Nice. That's a great presentation. You got it. No questions.
They want dinner.
Looks like you got one.
Are they awake?
All right, since we had nobody, hey there, everybody, again. Catherine Johnson, data nerd. Okay, so this question is for Ben, and want to just get into your brain with a hypothetical. So 25 years ago, our cell phones were like cinder blocks, like especially the Nokia phones. But I got one, thank you. So what do you expect to be predicted at the end of 25 years? So looking back 25 years ago, it was like 120 megabytes would take up a lot of storage. Now we can get almost a terabyte, in our smartphones today. With everything expanding, our CCTVs are taking up more infrastructure. How do you think that we'll look at the end of those 25 years as we're expanding our broadband networks?
Yeah, great question. Tough question. Yeah, I mean, I don't really know how to answer that. Fiber optics is I guess a pretty safe technology for us in the immediate future, I feel. And it definitely gives GDOT that resiliency and dependability that we're looking for, as well as, state-of-the-art ability with regards to like low latency capabilities. So it's what we envision for the immediate future, and I guess hopefully that somewhat answers your question, but I can't really theorize on what the future might look like in that respect.
Appreciate you, Ben. That was all I had.
Looks like we got a question here. Looks like we got a question here.
It's a question for Ben. I wanted to ask about, you guys are installing these mini hubs along the corridors to kind of fiber connectivity out to the coastline, et cetera. Are you guys, with these fiber paths, are you guys doing redundant paths at all, or is it just a home run shot? And like that's just kind of a concern. If you lose just one of those hubs or anything, you kind of lose connection to the coast.
Right, yeah. So we are just installing the trunk along one side of the interstate, if that's what you mean by redundancy. And so the idea is that this is also a well-maintained network, and with that OMC, we'll have service level agreements for the type of criticality, depending on how many devices we lose, things like that. And so they'll have response times to match what we would require for that.
Right. Any other questions? Looks like we got one.
This question's for Christy, actually. On the NEVI compliance stations, you mentioned that after 5 years, they can decommission. Is there anything, any kinds of incentives or things like that to make sure that if somebody elects to decommission a station, that there will be another one to come up and replace it? It seems like after 5 years, you could potentially find gaps if folks decided to decommission their stations without.
Yeah, at this point, no, there's not. You know, whether or not there could be in the future, I don't know, but not at this point.
All right, looks like no other questions. So, yeah. Thank you to all the speakers. And so we are a little ahead of schedule, so I just have a couple of announcements before. So if anyone are in need of the dining tickets, so please see Madison. All right, and we have a happy hour from 5 to 5:30 p.m. the hall outside, and also like we have the plated dinner. Which is going to be set up in this hall. So see you all. So we got to leave right now.